Hey everyone, we're going to do a very quick, hopefully not too time consuming talk about audience here in this lecture video. I've amended this presentation to hopefully be a little bit more digestible online for you. So let's get into it. Let's talk about audience for a little bit. Normally, when we talk about audience, or when we talk about encoding or writing and decoding or reading a document, we might think about it this way. We might think about the writer interacting with the document and the reader interacting with the document. The problem with this is that there's kind of a breakdown between the writer and the reader in this case. The document itself just becomes merely a conduit for communication. And I think certainly that this is true to some degree, but we need to kind of shift our thinking a little bit. We need to start thinking about how the writer can look through the eyes of the reader, who then is kind of looking at the document. And this is a very kind of rudimentary way of starting a discussion on audience. And really, if you think about it, it turns the concept of audience into something of a kind of Jedi mind trick. How can you best understand the reader so that you can get the best out of them as they read and interpret your document? If you remember David Dobrin's definition, which he wasn't completely happy with, of technical writing, he said that a technical writer's job is to accommodate information to the user. So in this case, the audience becomes the primary objective here. We have to make sure that they are the ones fully understanding the content, and you can't really do that if you're interacting with the document directly and not through the perspective of that audience or that reader. So that's how we're going to kind of frame this entire talk and our readings and activities this week. Is how can we understand the audience in order to create better content that serves them? One thing that I think is really true about technical writing, and this is something I'll probably say time and time again in this class, is that technical writing is a very selfless act. It's not about the writer. It's not about necessarily even the content. It's how that audience interprets that content. So that's something I want our brains to orient to. Technical writing is a very selfless act. And that's strange because writing is usually seen as a selfish act. So good technical writers attempt to bend language and document design, and I think language and design are both important here, to fit the needs of the audience that is listening or reading or whatever, decoding the message. So I know part of your readings this week is to look at the final projects for the course. Think about your final projects, and I want you to think about, if you come up with an idea, who is this idea for? Who is it serving, and why do they need it? And if you can answer those questions, you're probably well on your way to establishing a very solid project idea. Doing some sort of audience analysis is something we'll be doing more in depth in a few weeks or so. Excuse me. So you may remember this triangle from the video from last week, or was it a couple weeks ago? I can't remember now. The rhetorical situation triangle. There's the writer, the reader, the text. And part of that, of course, is understanding audience. And when you ask the right questions, you can get a better sense of, on a broad scale, who the audience is. Readers have questions, for example, like, what is this? Why do I have to read it? How does it affect me? What will I have to do? Etc., etc. And there are peripheral questions, who else might read this? What led to this document? How does your own position impact the creation of the document? And of course, there are content management questions. How much do they need to know? How much do my readers have in terms of knowledge in a particular expertise or a particular area of knowledge? And can I estimate their educational level? And of course, there's an important cultural background question here. As a writer, you may ask, if you're writing a particular document for a group of Americans versus a group of Chinese business or professionals, you may need to pay attention to certain cultural standards or cultural conventions. Like, for example, in American culture, we have this really strange obsession with mindlessly greeting each other. How are you doing today? Oh, I'm good. I'm great. You don't really get a whole lot of that in some other countries, especially Asian countries, where it's expected just to get right down to business. So, all of these questions and concepts are constantly weighing down on writers as they determine who their audience is, what they need, why they need it, and the content and the shape of the content that will best get their readers what they need. So these are very broad concepts, of course, but we're gonna start broad and narrow in here. So, really, the goal here with this short video is to talk about single audiences and multiple audiences. And when you're writing for a single audience, in this case, let's just hypothetically say it is your boss at your job. You will want to make sure you have a clear understanding of who they are, what they need, and how they need it in order to get the best results from them as a reader. So that's what we're going to talk about first here. And I don't want to go through, there's going to be a lot of slides with information, a ton of information on it here. I'm going to post this Prezi on our course website in the readings this week, and you can go through it at your own pace if you'd like to. So feel free to do that. So in terms of understanding someone's professional, organizational, situational, or contextual background, you might just want to start with, what is their organizational title? What does the title of their job tell you about their needs as a reader? You may then lead into a further down a rabbit hole and say, well, what is the function within their organization? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? What are their operational concerns? And then you might think about, what are their areas of expertise? Are they more attuned to thinking about marketing, or are they more attuned to thinking about day-to-day, financial concerns of the company? Are they in charge of budget, for example? These kinds of questions will help you determine what information and content they're going to need, and also what information that their attention is going to gravitate towards, and maybe even by then process of elimination, what information they're going to gravitate away from. Gravitate away, that's kind of a contradiction in terms. And then think about a relationship to you, their distance to you on the job. If it's somebody you talk to on a day-to-day basis versus somebody you maybe have talked to never, or maybe just once or twice a year at the company picnic, well, how formal do you need to be? What level of language do you need to use on a given piece of information? So all of these things are weighing down on us. And then, some people, they want to think about the educational background. What level of education does this reader have? And thereby, what level of technical expertise do they have? This doesn't have to be formal education, of course. It can be professional education as well. And this might help you determine content. And then, this is a more controversial one. What about their personal background? Maybe you can get a sense of what they like, what they dislike, what their biases are, the pros and cons of understanding certain concepts. And then, of course, there's this idea of age differences, different generations in the workplace. What do they know? What do they don't know based on their experience? All of these things weigh down on us. So multiple audiences present us with special problems for doing some sort of audience analysis. And below are some questions. Below this, on the bottom half of the slide, are some questions that help us start to begin to make sense of these things. And we might ask ourselves, in what ways and to what extent are the different audiences of this document different from each other? What are my production constraints? Is one audience more important than other audiences? And for example, I recently had to work on a proposal for promotion here at the university, and one of the audiences was tenure track employees, and another audience was non-tenure track employees. And those two demographics have different needs and have different processes for reading. So I had to kind of pay attention to those things and create content that served both of their needs simultaneously. So this is a very common, I would say probably this is way more common type of communication than the single audience. And it can be tricky at times. So one way to kind of determine differences between audiences is to look at reading ability. Let me kind of zoom in here. So I want to make a note here. When I say reading ability, I mean somebody's actually ability to read something and understand it. Now, I am a big fan of simple language. I'm a huge fan of writing that does its best to eliminate jargon and to make complex concepts, accessible. But I do want to make a note here that simple language does not mean writing is less significant or intellectual or important. In fact, I think some of the most intelligent writing can be very, very simple and in simplistic sentence structure and use small words. So keep that in mind. And I also want to say that someone's reading ability does not determine their intelligence. That is definitely a myth. And I'm going to let you read through this slide on your own. If you want to pause the video and do that, that's totally fine. But I'm going to move on right now. So if you're trying to get at low ability readers, or like let's say you are composing a document for 10th graders, you've been asked to volunteer and teach something at a high school for an for a group of engineering club students, and you might want to use these kinds of tools to help you actually do this. Although I have to say, as somebody who holds a PhD, I also appreciate this attention to detail, not because I'm a low ability reader, but because I think that sometimes some of the best and most well-considered ideas can be presented in really straightforward terms. So yeah, something to consider. It says important also to note that different people have different goals of reading. So managers, researchers, technicians, or engineers, all of these people have different reasons for reading, and these are some of those reasons here. So if you want to pause the video and check that out, feel free to do so. There are people who read for different reasons, have different tasks when reading. Serial readers really need to learn and remember the importance of information, so serial reading depends heavily on the brain's memory process. People who are interested in research, so research readers read to find an answer. Performance readers usually read to carry out a set of procedures, or are big into planning and translating concepts into action. In the same way, there are ways to improve each of these kinds of tasks, and you can read through these on your own. But simply put, depending if we pay attention to the reasons why people are reading, the tasks they need to carry out, we can do things with a language that help us actually achieve those goals. So this is some of that to pay attention to here. Moving on. Another one of the last things we'll talk about here is actually production constraints. And what I mean production constraints, excuse me, I can't seem to talk today. When people are producing documents, there might at times be constraints on the physical aspects of the document, or the physical aspects of creating and writing something that shape how they might produce content for readers or certain kinds of audiences. Things like time. Like if you're on a timeline, if you have 2 weeks to write something that should normally take somebody a month, your decisions are going to be more rushed, or might be made with less care. Sometimes money is an issue if there's not enough money to get things done. There might be issues in terms of like the contextual limitations, things like page length or size or the color, the type of language you can use. Sometimes people go into technical writing jobs or positions that require technical writing, and they are only allowed to use certain kinds of language, and that can be a constraint on producing the right kind of content for the right kind of reader. So you just have to learn to work within those contents, or within those constraints, and that is what's called rhetorical flexibility, something we may talk about in more depth later on this semester. So that is it. Like I said, this is short. There's a lot of information on especially the latter half of those slides. If you want to go through them, I've posted the Prezi in our module this week. Feel free to do that. If you have questions, contact me. Otherwise, the reading should help further contextualize some of these ideas. And yeah, have a nice day. Bye.